right, y'all. For those who are here for the whole space conversation, we finna get started. Is that okay with y'all? Huh? Right. Sarah, you just made a great point. We are here to hold space and have conversations. This is something that we decided to do kind of in conjunction with Missy Lane's Assembly Room. So y'all make sure y'all order food and coffee, and Brooklyn Barista is over there. Espresso martini and all those good things. But we're here to kind of hold space. And in this conversation that we're having, we want to talk about DEI and kind of the dismantling of DEI and what it looks like in terms of mental health and what it looks like in terms of kind of coping with some of the things that are going on right now. So my name is Dion Chavis, affectionately known by many as the Glad Dad. I do a lot of work in parenting, responsible parenting, and mental health and all of those things. So I have two wonderful ladies with me who are here to kind of talk about what DEI looks like and what it looks like in terms of its impact on mental health. So Sarah Wilder is a passionate advocate for social programs, social progress, utilizing her formal education and a decade of experience as a licensed clinical social worker and addiction specialist to challenge the stigma surrounding mental health and addiction. Sarah's work emphasizes the profound societal impact of these issues and the urgent need for transformation and change at every level to reduce the trauma footprint. Also, I have Dee McDougall, Speaker D, Worker D, all things D, is a global diversity, equity, and inclusion and marketing and communications leader with experience across several industries. Her current work includes setting corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, and bunch of other stuff. She also serves as she serves her community as a board chair for Positive Childhood Alliance North Carolina, the executive committee member of the North Carolina Black Entrepreneurship Council, and board member for the Boys and Girls Club of Durham and Orange County. Y'all, please, round of applause for these wonderful, wonderful women. So I want to get started and, just let everyone know we call this whole space because we are holding space. So this is just a space where you can feel free to be authentic, feel free to have the conversations that might not always feel comfortable. And we're going to do this hopefully every Sunday here at Missy Lane, and we're going to cover different topics. So just be on the lookout for next week's topic. So as we get started, let's kind of talk about what dismantling DEI has looked like and kind of talk about what it means when we say that it is being or has been dismantled, right? So let's come up with a working definition, D, of what DEI is, because a lot of people don't even know what DEI stands for, what it looks like, and what it is. So please give us a definition of what DEI is.
Okay, so I would say that unfortunately, in this climate, DEI for some people means Black, right? And that's not it. So what I tell people at work is that if we think about diversity as all the dimensions of identity that make us who we are, right? So we have race and ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion or lack of religion, spirituality, disability, whether that's visible or invisible. You have so many things that make you who you are. So if I was to say that diversity is a long list of things and we could check a box around, come on in. Yeah, absolutely. Come on in. Yeah. So we're all family here. So if we think about diversity as all of the different dimensions of your identity that make you who you are, right? And then equity is, us examining the systems within which we live and operate in society. And we're saying, based on your identity, are these systems fair? What I tell people all the time is that the systems within which we operate were built with a certain profile of people in mind. So if we accept that to be true, then we know that the more diversity of the people who live and operate within those systems likely weren't created for it to be fair. So equity is not a fast pass to a successful outcome. It is a guarantee that people will have access to a fair process and fair systems. And inclusion, no matter if you're introvert or extrovert, we all want to feel like we are part of something bigger. So inclusion is the experience of being. So based on your identity and based on the systems within which we live and operate, do you feel like you belong? Do you feel like this space is for you? And so when we stop saying DEI and we actually say the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would challenge anyone who doesn't want that for everyone, right? So that's how we think about DEI.
So, Sarah, to you, when we talk about DEI being dismantled, we're not just talking about policies, right? We're also talking about people, because people are being affected, people are losing their jobs, people are mentally in a space that has them thinking about where they will go from here. Talk about some of the psychological and emotional effects that come with watching these DEI initiatives disappear.
Absolutely. So I have a very different perspective because I get a very intimate part of a person when they come to my office, or my virtual office, because I'm fully virtual in terms of my practice right now. But I get the very personalized experience of like kind of the trickle down of like, okay, I deal with this not only in my environment of work, but how does it affect me as an individual? And so that a lot of the times first foremost has to be an emotional experience. And fear is the first thing, right? So just with the recent changes in our societal and political shift, the threat of cuts of funding is that's a whole career path for some people, working in clinical research towards, providing more educational opportunities to people of color or marginalized communities, that they need to do work now and have data to be able to support, okay, next steps in 5 years as to where is cancer research going. So one, I think Dee made a good point, is when we break up what DEI actually looks like, it's an acronym that actually has words, and each word has its own impact on a personalized micro level, at a meso level, and then also at a macro level. But I deal with more of the micro, is that has nothing to do with race. I have white people that just come to my office and they're just scared that they can't feed their families because they dedicated their lives to working towards clinical research in a career area that has nothing to do with racial injustices, but it is just as impactful from that perspective. So I think really the biggest confusion that breeds the most chaos is people's fear and that initial emotional reaction that we all have when someone says like, oh, DEI efforts, or you're like, oh yeah, I'm not racist. Like, at least for me, where I grew up, like I had to really understand what it meant to be inherently racist as a Caucasian person, and understand that that's not all of who I am, but fear was a significant part of that, because if I had to admit that, who would I be? Because I can't control what I look like and where I came from. But I think that's really what, at least how it hits my front door, is working with people's fear and including that in their perspective of how they move forward. You can be scared and still make an effort towards going out, and you can't necessarily change maybe a whole legislative bill in one day, but can you go to Miss Elaine's assembly room and have a conversation and include yourself in learning, even when you're scared? Did that answer the question?
Yeah. So for the audience members, how have any of you all been affected by the DEI rollback so far? Not yet? Okay, good. So a lot of companies are claimed to be committed to DEI, and after 2000, after George Floyd, everyone was Black Lives Matter, and all of these things were going on. But a lot of those same organizations are now not even quietly, but publicly rolling those policies back. Do you think that the efforts that were presented were real, or was it just a response at the time to public pressure?
So this is a little bit of a loaded question for me for a number of reasons. I was saying, when we were chatting before, like I've been in DEI work since pre-George Floyd's murder, right? So the summer of 2020 was like a perfect storm of things, right? We were all at home because of COVID times, and so everybody was spending way more time on social media. And there had been a series of instances where, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement had caught steam, and then George Floyd's murder, and it's summer and riots, and then everybody felt like, not everybody, lots of people felt like they needed to react, right? So that's when you saw the black squares on Instagram, and you saw all these things, and you saw people challenging particularly retail brands. Where are the black people on your boards? Where are the black people in corporate? And so a lot of companies responded to that by saying, we are going to do more. And because the job market was booming, you had people who were internal within organizations who had a passion around DEI, and they got put into these strategic roles, but they didn't necessarily have the business acumen to carry that strategy forward. And I will tell anybody, passion does not make you good at your job. And so when you have this perfect storm around racial injustice and social injustice, when you have that happening and you have people guiding a strategy within an organization and they are fueled by passion, but they're not able to connect that to how it makes the business better, that is going to create more of a divide than anything else. We, that summer, were having, these safe space conversations, not led by professionals, with, black colleagues coming in and pouring out their feelings, and white colleagues being like, I don't even know if I should say black or African American. Like, I don't know what to do here. I was raised in a time to say I was colorblind. And we were not good stewards, in my opinion, we were not good stewards of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at that time, because it was just like kind of thrown together. But a lot of companies had a lot of money, and so they put these commitments and dollars behind DEI initiatives, but they didn't have the foundation to support it strategically. So a lot of what you're seeing now is that these 5-year plans, because from 2020 to 2025, they're able to say, hey, we're going to pull back on this. But in reality, I don't think that they're pulling back in the way that it's being publicized. I think that what they're doing is they are embedding these practices into other parts of their business and calling it something different to get the heat off of them. I don't know how many of you all are paying attention to, the rogue folks, like I think his name's Robbie Starbuck, who is suing companies for their outward-facing DEI initiatives, right? They're going after these large companies and suing. And the big thing is when a company gets sued, it costs them money to litigate. So they're taking down all of the things that they say they're doing, right, to create some distance between them and the people who are looking to litigate against them. Also, there have been claims of reverse discrimination. So whereas before you had to be from a marginalized background and prove that you had been discriminated against, what this current administration has done is they have stacked the deck across all of these agencies that we once felt safe. We felt like it was safe to go to the EEOC or Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or we felt like it was safe to go to the Civil Rights Office, or we felt like it was safe to go to these places and file a claim. Well, what he has done, or what this administration has done, is he has stacked these agencies with people who believe in reverse discrimination being real. So I say all that to say that I don't think that companies are pulling back in the way that they are saying. I think that they are saying what is necessary to get themselves out of the spotlight. I also think that the very benefits of diversity, which is why we do this work, it's not just a moral imperative. Companies perform better when they have diverse perspectives at the table. I will use this example. Is anybody in here from Texas or lived in Texas? No? All right. Who's from North Carolina? All right. So besides my sister, if I say, what's barbecue to you, what do you say? Well, how do you describe barbecue? Vinegar-based, and what meat? Right, pulled pork in a vinegar-based sauce. If you take somebody from Texas and ask them what barbecue is, they're gonna be like, it's brisket, it's smoked, all that matters. If you talk to somebody from Kansas City and you say barbecue, they're gonna say that it's ribs. And if you talk to somebody from California and say barbecue, they're gonna be like, oh, what time are you getting on the grill? And the reason that matters is because that's diversity, right? When I ask one question and you have diverse perspectives at the table, you get very different answers. And if we are in business, right, to be able to build a campaign, we can take those diverse perspectives and we can create something that will help people understand exactly what we're saying. So companies benefit from that. So while they may be taking down their commitments to DEI as far as the targets that they've set and all that, they're not gonna say that they don't benefit from those diverse perspectives. They're just gonna do it in a more covert way, because overt creates opportunity to be sued. That was a long answer, but that I feel really strongly about that.
So that's a great point, because that's something that, we hear companies like Target, and Target is rolling back their DEI. So what you're saying is that sometimes these larger companies are kind of hiding their DEI efforts so they won't have to litigate with someone who is out to get them.
I wouldn't say hiding. And this is what I would challenge everybody to do is read beyond the headline, right? If you go and you read Target's statement about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think it's like they have a bullseye on inclusion now, or like that's the rebrand. And if we look at what Pepsi has done, this guy who's the person who's doing all the suing, the statement that he made on Twitter, and again, this is a what we call it, dog whistle. The way the opposition to DEI, the way that they talk about this, they talk about it in a way that connects to the emotional side of people who feel like they are being excluded, right? So I'm just going to say it. If I am a white, cisgender, heterosexual Christian man in the South, I may feel like DEI initiatives are not for me. If I'm not a veteran, if I'm, don't have, like, I could feel like all these programs are for somebody else. So the way that the people who are opposing DEI, the way they're talking about it, it appeals to that stakeholder. So the way they talk about, as an example, Pepsi issued an internal statement to their team. And as an example, this guy says, "Oh, I had a great call with Pepsi and they're rolling back their DEI initiatives. They're getting rid of all this stuff." When really the email says, hey, one of the things that he says is Pepsi's not going to have a chief diversity officer anymore. But the email that the president sent to their staff is, our chief diversity officer is now our chief engagement officer. We are still committed to having people from all backgrounds. Well, he's not going to say that to the conservative base. He's not going to say, Pepsi has rebranded their diversity initiatives into engagement. He's going to say, I won because there's no chief diversity officer. But what I would challenge us all to do is read beyond the headlines. Because if we read what they're saying, what they are saying is we are expanding our scope. Yeah, they're taking out the words diversity, equity, and inclusion. Target has taken that down. But they are also saying that we are going to expand our focus on diverse-owned businesses to include small businesses. Well, who is the fastest growing contingent of small business owners? Black women. So if we can get beyond what one group wants us to think and really focus on what is happening, we can have a less emotional response. So I don't want to say they're hiding it. I would say it's more of a rebrand. And I would challenge all of us to read beyond the headline before we say, I'm not fooling with Target because they have rolled back DEI. Yeah.
So I'm going to do my best to not talk too psychobabble, but try to explain from like a neuroscience, because you could look at my credentials and be like, okay, she's a social worker, but I actually have a very specific interest in like how the brain works and how that impacts behavior. And you said something about just the timing of like where George Floyd's murder was an activation point. And let's take it out of the context of DEI and look at it just from a behaviorist standpoint. When someone comes to therapy and comes to treatment, it's a very expected pattern that they have this kind of like huge relief. That they come in, they just kind of dump. They're like, I've been going through this, I've been going through that, and they have this burst of energy that in some ways it's like a pseudo confidence for like, okay, I can go back out and I can tackle and I can do all the things that I really want to do. And I caution people, I'm like, it is not a really sustainable feeling. It's just a feeling because you've burdened yourself for so long from a mental and emotional standpoint of a certain problem or a certain experience that you've been through. And when you actually share it and become vulnerable, there's this like, oh my gosh, I can go do anything. I had it too around the time of George Floyd was because I couldn't figure out, how can I as a cisgendered white woman, as a professional, but I'm not going to go to the protests because I don't do large crowds like that. How can I give back? And I created a space that was really about your relationship with race. But if I was being honest, it was the best I could do for the short term, but it wasn't sustainable long term to hold every single weekend, to be the one clinician that holds space for like this huge conversation. And we've been with year 5 since George Floyd. Over the last 5 years, it changed my mindset of like, okay, how can I do little things that built into my lifestyle that are more sustainable, where I can see myself, coming to Missy Lane's and having this conversation and being, a leader not necessarily a leader for every white person. I don't speak for every white person, but sharing my story and coming to consciousness about my relationship with race and what's influenced that, or supporting a small-owned business that happens to be Black-owned, like doing those little micro-dose behaviors that one big behavior actually taught me more or less about how to rebalance. And so I think you spoke really great to that from a business corporate level, like a business. I think DEI, and this is just my opinion from the outside looking in, because I have been in corporations, but then I slowly worked myself out and I own my own business, and DEI has to be done inside out and outside in. Each individual person has to understand what they emit to contribute to DEI, and businesses can't always have a safe space for everyone's inside out version of DEI because they have to run the business. They are impacting communities. They are making money to be able to, contribute to a scholarship fund for someone of a cause that they mean that means something to that business. And unfortunately, that does have a sacrifice to someone's emotional experience. But also, to one of the biggest issues as a therapist sometimes is kind of going back to that first example, is the way the brain works is that it's short-term and long-term. And there's certain parts of your brain that literally go offline when you're experiencing emotion. So if you're fearful or if you feel relief, you're like, oh, I can just go. But we think it's long-term, but it's actually really short-term. And it takes balancing and mistakes and burnout to realize that it's like, oh, my passion for change has to be regulated. And passion can be painful if you're not prepared to put those things in place where you have to sometimes sacrifice short-term and long-term. Doesn't mean that you ever have to sacrifice your goal or your expectation, but the way that the body and the brain is naturally built is that it's kind of a trick. If you don't understand how the brain works, it's going to impact every system internally. So that's kind of the hard part about to tell people what I do is I do all that internal systems work of getting people to understand their own experiences, but also their own biochemistry, how fear literally impacts hormone regulation, let alone the external systems that we have in place that impact us from a healthcare perspective. Hopefully I sum that up. Yeah.
So I want to talk about some of the emotions that we felt beyond DEI, because at the core and at the bottom of the DEI is this administration, right? At the root of it, that's the root of it. And a lot of us have felt certain levels of, I'll speak for myself, disappointment since November of last year, right? So Sarah, let's talk about ways for us to manage that disappointment, because I think a lot of our thoughts on DEI and how we think about what's going on, they come from the fact that we're disappointed that we didn't win, right? We're disappointed at the outcome. We're disappointed at the things that we're seeing. So as a therapist, what are some strategies that you think people can put in place in their day-to-day lives to manage that disappointment? Because this isn't something that, November happened, January 6th came, and then that was it. This is going to be something that we're going to experience over time. So what are some ways that we can kind of manage our levels of disappointment?
Well, that's a challenging question. More challenging because there's so many. There's so many things, and everyone has their own individualized routine of self-care, but I'd say something from the mental health standpoint that I run into a lot is people's resistance to understanding that self-care is not just external. It has to be developing a relationship with emotions that, when disappointment comes up, how you are mindful of that, hold space for yourself to not really believe wholeheartedly, because when we feel something, it reinforces a thought, and a thought reinforces a belief system that sometimes has always been there. And that can be a very tricky process, and that throws us off in even our routines and our lifestyle. So I see that from, a standpoint of not to make this, so addictions, right? When I'm helping someone in early recovery detox off of a substance, and even as simple as sugar, is that you're going to feel a lot of things, and you cannot believe that one feeling to be, because that literally will change your whole viewpoint. You will start seeing people coming to you, be like, oh, you're going to disappoint me. We start anticipating, because it's a stress response. And I'm passionate about this particular point, is that I just don't feel like I know I didn't have the education. We learned about emotions, but through the transitions throughout life and development and the experiences that we go through, each emotion has a narrative that is personal to us. And that's kind of the work that I do on a one-to-one basis, is that we have to have a conversation with ourselves and know that voice of what disappointment sounds like, so it doesn't convince us that it is everywhere around us. Because that generalization, it's just a natural response to the brain. We're an all or nothing species. It makes us a great species, but it also, we have our downfalls. And I've been telling from more of my community, or whoever I get a chance to talk to, is realizing that pain is where we change the most. So this disappointment period, I felt it from, because I hold space for people, but I also had my own disappointment things. I had a conflict with family members because of this transition it couldn't be about race because they don't understand this conversation, unfortunately. But because I have had that conversation with my own emotion of like, okay, disappointment, it's a time period. It's not a fact all the time that these next 4 years are going to be where these conversations, we have to build that tolerance to have the tough conversations, and disappointment is going to be a part of that. I was very disappointed that my family member couldn't understand what I do and the impact of one person's political success has on my livelihood or my world. But I couldn't let that disappointment stop me from getting up and continuing the healthcare routine that I have, the relationship with food. Because if I go through my resume, I niche down and I help people build the lifestyle of recovery through the relationship with food, because that's usually the first behavior where emotion presents itself, and we deter. I'm a comfort eater. I'm gonna go eat food that makes me feel crappy the next day, and then now my next day is impacted by disappointment, right? So when we can build those routines and make those sustainable, I think disappointment and experiencing times like these, we'll be able to see that change is gonna come from this. It has to.
So when we talk about self-care, does anybody have a self-care routine? Self-care routine? Keisha, what's your self-care routine? Unplug. I like it. Anybody else? Exercise. Journaling, that's good. Prayer. So Dee, we were talking earlier about your self-care includes running. I'm sorry, you're right. Walking, not running. Walking, not running. Walk, don't run. Right. Let's talk about how you found that walking was helpful to you, and talk about like how it makes you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my sister's here. My mom, she has this thing that she says to us, like, focus on what you can control, right? That is, it was very annoying like earlier in life, but it's sage advice, because there's so much stuff that is beyond our control. And to your point, Sarah, we can do our part, but what happens when us doing our part, we still don't get the result that we want, right? And so for me, walking is a way for me to disconnect from my day job. So I do DEI work all day, every day. And not only am I a Black woman in corporate America, but I also carry the responsibility of ensuring that people who come from various minority groups feel like they belong at work. So, all hell has broken loose since these executive orders have gone into play on January 20th and the ones that followed. And so, like, I got people, early career people who are like 24, like, D, am I going to be okay? And I'm like, dog, I don't know. But you can't say that. But what I can do, right, is I can force myself to take a step away from my computer, because I can't solve all those problems. And the old, you can't pour from an empty cup, and all of those things are very true. And I'm not going to be any help to someone else if I am frazzled. So walking, and people are like, oh, D, why don't you run? Like, you could just, you could be more productive if you just go, take 35 minutes and go run a couple of miles instead of taking an hour and 15 minutes to do longer miles. And I need that longer time. I need that longer time of listening to music or catching up and talking, listen to a podcast that's about something totally unrelated to give my brain a break. And I have found that to be so helpful. My other form of self-care in this season of life is squeezing every ounce of joy out of life. What I have learned is that the disappointment remains, but somehow the sun still rises every day. So either we are going to be disappointed and miss out on life, right? Or we're going to be disappointed and live life. And so I am trying to be really intentional about squeezing every ounce of joy I can, and carving out space for my own like personal well-being with walking. So those are the things that I'm trying to do, because, you know, we can't control the craziness, but we can control certain parts of our life.
And Sarah, for you, you know, it's oftentimes said that the therapists oftentimes need therapists, right? Or need strategies to cope with, because you're helping us with all of our problems. So, you know, I tell my therapist all the time, like, I know it's something that it's a lot to deal with and a lot to cope with. I couldn't do it. I don't want to hear, you know, back to back to back people's issues every day or however many days a week you work. How do you manage to cope and find joy and find self-care?
Great question. Because yes, every therapist, I don't want to say, I'm an advocate for not everyone needs therapy, but everyone can benefit from therapy. But to answer your question and stay on topic is that, like, I did during this time, I had been taking a break from therapy because I had already kind of got to a place where I'm like, okay, let me not overexpose myself to my own emotions, because that's what's something you got to be careful with when you're too dependent on talk therapy and not necessarily the action of like taking care of yourself outside of session. And for me as a practitioner, the first part of my career, honestly, I was that version. I want to say I was a bad therapist because I wasn't taking care of myself, but I definitely was not the therapist that you see here today. I sounded different because I have, for my whole life, have always kind of absorbed and exposed. I'm a feeler. If you're a zodiac person, I'm a Cancer. So it's like I literally deal with my own emotions and everyone else's. They just are part of me. And it wasn't until I understood and I paused. I actually didn't grow my business because I was my business. I had to focus on my health. So when in action today, when disappointment happens, that was me making sure I stayed consistent with not like, and I evaluated whether like, okay, should I hold more space for other people right now? Or should I maybe cut back on 1 or 2 sessions a week and hold space for myself, get outdoors a little bit more. Sometimes I dog sit on the side because I don't have the lifestyle for a dog. And putting myself, animals are a huge coping skill for me. But also remaining consistent with my gym routine. My health routine for the last 6 or 7 years has had to be very intentional to be able to do what I do. Because I can't help just we all are exposed to other people's emotions, especially during these times. And being able to kind of practice that mindfulness and being more attentive to, like, because I'm an intellectualizer, I'll think and not even realize I'm thinking, and just be very mindful of like, okay, doing it again, because I got my own personal problems even outside of holding space to people's problems. And I'm like, it's hard, but I have to. It's also hard to get up every morning at 5:30 to try to get to the gym before and doing my work and staying consistent with the projects I have going on outside of just what pays my bills, and maintaining my goals, because I had to rewire my brain to think that like, oh, I am the change. Like if I can't force other people to change, I have to be the representative of change. I've inspired more people, honestly, not to like say it, but like I've inspired more people living my life and having fun, and then I have then trying to get other people to live their lives and try to have fun. So it has looked like in the last 6 months, me doing new things. I tried something I was scared of, which is modeling. Like it was something that I unexpectedly, I was like, oh, and people are like, you have so many great things. Doesn't mean that I don't struggle. I was still scared when I did it, but I was also disappointed because I'm like, okay, well, if I have to create change, I have to keep going out there and being a representative of what I believe in, what I value. And that's self-care, that's taking care of your brain, taking care of your emotions. So hopefully that answered your question about like, those are the things I have to do. I have to challenge myself. I have to isolate. I have to walk and be in nature. I have to talk to people, even though I'm an introvert at heart. So...
Can I add one thing? So I would say that when you mentioned, Sarah, being an inspiration to others because you are living, right? I think that's part of the thing too, is that be who you are and be who you are out loud, right? Because you never know who's watching. And for those of us who operate in majority spaces, a lot of us are racial and ethnic minorities, but we are majority or possess privilege in some other area, right? And so if you are able to leverage that privilege and be live out loud and be an inspiration to others just by you existing, that helps to drive the change that we want to see. As you mentioned, corporations or any organization, we can't carry the burden of changing every employee to be the most inclusive version of themselves so that we have the most inclusive workplace, right? But what we can do as individuals is like lead our lives in a way that inspires others to be helpful and inclusive. If you are a person that maybe you weren't necessarily focused on LGBTQ plus inclusion, but you see how the LGBTQ plus community, particularly trans people, are being othered right now. What can you do to be more inclusive of the trans community in your own life that may then inspire other people to be inclusive in their lives? And that I think is really, really important, because sometimes we're looking for the change to happen over there when really the change needs to happen with us and out loud and in a visible way. So people say, oh, okay, I can do that, right? Like, I didn't introduce myself with my pronouns today, but the other day when I was talking about, the impact of these executive orders, it was important to me that I spoke strongly about trans erasure, right? Because who else is going to talk about it? And how can I make other people feel more comfortable acknowledging that that's happening? I can do it by talking about it.
So one of the things that I think some people might be going through is feeling like they need to shrink themselves in the spaces that they're in order to kind of not fall into, people want to keep their job. Like, let's keep it real. People want to keep their job. What advice would you have for someone who feels like they have to shrink themselves or make themselves smaller in the workplace in order to keep their job?
I'm not the right person to ask, because like you said, you said introvert. I am as extroverted as they come. I can't be quiet even if I tried. So there's no way, and I'm like a beam of sunshine when I just try. We talked earlier about being able to smile without showing your teeth. It's just not me, right? And so I also feel really strongly that shrinking yourself doesn't guarantee your spot anyway. Right? If we look at the news about layoffs, and I think people used to think that, oh, it was only unproductive people who were laid off, or people who didn't get great performance reviews who were laid off, or that there was some rhyme or reason. There's no formula that will help you understand if you are at risk for being laid off. But shrinking yourself will harm you now and into the future. And so I would say, don't shrink yourself. What I would say is be good at your job now, because that experience you can carry forward. Focus on upskilling yourself now. There are lots of emerging technologies and things that you can learn about. Consistently challenge yourself to learn and grow, but I don't believe in shrinking yourself. I will also say, look, be authentically appropriate for work. I will say, I know I have a fellow DEI practitioner in the room, I'm not gonna call her out, but people say all the time, oh, well, be authentic, or, my day job, one of our core values is be yourself at work. Sometimes people can take that too far, right? Like, you can't be all of you anywhere. So be authentically appropriate for work. And don't think that because people don't want to talk about politics with you at work that you can't be yourself. So I would say don't necessarily shrink yourself, but now you might need to read the room and be figuring out what is most appropriate for the setting that you're in. And if you find that you can't be who you want to be at work, there are other places you can work. But now may not be the time to try to fight the power within the company, like in a really loud and bold way. So I would say authenticity in a way that's most appropriate for where you work, but don't shrink yourself for anybody.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer. I'm just going to go off of what just kind of surfaced while I was listening to you, because that's the most authentic version I got of me is because my profession goes to more of the internal depth, that's the unseen. I would say that shrinkage is not always voluntary for people. Involuntary reactions of like just facing a situation that causes you to want to shrink, that sometimes you don't have any control over that. And so that's what I help people is, there's many descriptions of what I do, but like one is to figure out a way to express themselves, whether that be verbally, sometimes it's in writing, sometimes it's art, sometimes whatever, is that recognize that if you do have that urge to shrink yourself and that is an okay place to start, is understanding yourself and your natural reactions to being triggered by an environment or a situation, and understanding that it's a stress response. And it's involuntary, but it can move to being more intentional and impactful, because that's the thing about authenticity, is that we're all in hopes, an authentic form of ourselves right here in this moment, but there's so much about ourselves that we've not learned, and that's things that have already happened to us in perspectives of trauma and how they impact us, or just the things that we've not uncovered yet. Like, I just started, maybe I'm gonna be going international, I don't know, my own goals are there, right? But those experiences are gonna bring different versions of who I am that are going to allow me to find that balance that Dee was talking about, is to consider yourself an ever-evolving work in progress. And so if that shrinkage is right now, then working on yourself is a very good point to start. So you can be able to learn how to expand a little bit more and find what that appropriateness is for you.
As we start to wrap up, I want to look at what the future of DEI kind of looks like to you all. Should we rethink how we are advocating? You said something that kind of stuck out to me when you talked about like how companies are reframing their DEI efforts. So should we rethink how we are advocating for equity and inclusion, knowing what we are facing for at least the next 4 years? Is it time for us to look at it differently and to start framing our approach? I don't want to say our attacks, but framing our approach at overcoming a lot of these barriers that we're facing a little bit different?
Yeah, I think it's important so I'm going to talk about, we cannot shift systems without the people who are currently in charge of the system, right? You can't do it. So we need people at the table with us. We can talk about flipping the table over and all that. The table's still going to be there and nothing will have gotten done. So my approach is to bring people into the conversation and help people understand how things may not be fair currently. And I know people want a more radical approach and a more immediate response, but we're trying to unwind systems that have been in place for hundreds of years, right? And so I think if we are focused on reframing our approach, I am a more strategic thinker on this. And so I would say that having a conversation about fairness, bringing people along on that journey, like why wouldn't you want it to be fair? Taking away the conversation, not taking away in that it doesn't matter, but shifting people's perspective away from only race and ethnicity and gender, because people's shoulders go to their ears the minute you start talking about race. People want it, to your point, they want to be defensive. I'm not racist. I'm not saying you are. You can be not racist, and this system within which we're operating is unfair. So if we're able to talk about a conversation around privilege that doesn't have to do with race or gender, I tell people all the time, I am privileged because I came from a family that has two parents. My parents are still married, and they live in the house where I grew up. My mom, my dad, my sister, and I, we have a group chat. We talk every single day. The risks that I am able to take as a 44-year-old woman because I have that support system in place, that is a privilege. I didn't earn that. I was given that. I was born into that. So if I can have a conversation around privilege that helps people understand that how I move through life is a little bit easier because of something I didn't earn, then I'm able to have a conversation with people that helps them understand that, hey, when we think about race or we think about, gender, you do realize that like parental leave policies kind of, like we could talk about the importance of paid family leave. If I can help people understand those, come on in. No, if I can help people understand that without them being, racist or homophobic or sexist, then you bring people into the conversation. So when I think about reframing, we have to bring more people who are decision makers along on this journey so that we can get the change that we want to see. So it's not just the language, it really is, to me, the approach, because what we want is equitable systems, but we're not in control. We're not in enough control to just blow it up. So we need them, and in order to get them, we're going to need to bring them along on the journey. And from an inclusion perspective, I ain't begging to be included. You know what I mean? Like if I am in a place where I don't feel like I am valued for what I bring to the table, I need to find somewhere else. Because when you get the Sunday scaries about going to work the next day, or you feel like you have to fight against who you are to be in that space, that's just not good enough. Like the paycheck isn't good enough for the challenges that you experience or encounter every day, or the toll that it takes on your mental health. So equity is one thing, right? We can fight the system, but if you don't feel included, then don't stay there is what I would say. Okay.
Okay, what's that?
Oh, okay. So no, this is something like that question because I do bring a different perspective, which I think has been talked about before, but it also goes through a lot of filters. But it's like, how do we transition from this old system of doing things into this new system, whether it's old world order, new world order, whatever language and how you speak of it, is that it's a generation gap. It's how is business being done in the history, and how can it be improved and updated? We update policies and procedures all the time from a very technical standpoint, but do we do that with our own selves? And that's the first bias. Like, absolutely racial bias, and the systems that have been created are absolutely biased, but we're also biased in our own, and that's okay. So it's starting from the individual's perspective of understanding what bias means for them in that inside out philosophy, versus, and then also how that impacts what has to be updated for the old, because the old system, I see this in healthcare, right? Hospitals, community health, all that, yes, they're deteriorating, especially since COVID, but they cannot go away. We're gonna need hospitals. We need surgery centers. There is a benefit to that, but has the infrastructure been delayed and being updated and for quality of life for the people that uphold the system, like the doctors and the nurses and the social workers that do there? Yes. And that is reform. That is what is, same thing in, I have a criminal justice background as well. So like the prison system, it needs reform. It doesn't necessarily need to be torn down to its roots and completely rebuilt. We have to create gateways and bridges to update from the old version to the new version. And that starts with something you said. I'm probably not going to get it right how you said it, but each individual's commitment to how that looks like from on a macro level, and how that in your personal lifestyle all the way into corporate areas and all that jazz.
So I think that's a perfect place to, I don't want to say end, but put a pin in the conversation for today. Thank you all for holding space with us. Thank you all for being a part of this conversation. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Dee. Social media, people can follow you. We're going to possibly turn this into a podcast and do some things and throw it out there. I think this is a great conversation that needs to be seen and heard all over the world. So social media, how can people follow you and stay in contact with you?
For anybody, young lady back in the corner, your career journey, find me on LinkedIn. So it's just D McDougal. I always love to talk to people about work. That's why they call me Worker D. And then on Instagram, I'm just at DMcD, DE.McD. So it's all open. So I look forward to connecting, and thank y'all for coming out.
Thank you too. So I got a lot of intersections. So my website, you can Google me, Sarah Wilder, SARA, no H, WILDER. Right Size Perspective is my business. Whereas like I can take my conversation with what I do in different spaces, but it really focuses on building recovery through the lifestyle of your relationship with food. But my Instagram, my personal one, which is public, is SWilder123. My professional is Right Size _perspective on Instagram. And I have YouTube as well. But it's all on my website.
Thank you all for coming out. We appreciate it. Hopefully we'll be back next Sunday if they'll have us.